Hello Internet. What I want to do in this video, and hopefully it's not too motion sickness inducing with this head rig. There's really no other way for me to video this thing in the room that I've got it without having a whole bunch of cameras, and I've only got one. So this is sort of an overview of the rig. Synthesizer sources here have Nord Drum 2, Nord Rack 2, iPad that's running MIDI Designer Pro, which I'm using to control things, a bunch of Roland pads, an alternate mode drum cat, and an old Roland Octopad. So all of these things together are being used so I can try to create a way for me to play multiple synthesizer parts as well as like the rhythmic percussion parts that normally people would play with keyboards. I don't really have any interest in learning how to play keyboard, and I'm not horrible at drums, so I figured it would make more sense to get better at drums and bring the synthesizer stuff in than try to learn an entirely new interface to make music. And the whole thing is basically being run on a computer running Reaper behind me. In hindsight, it probably would have made more sense to spend more money and get Live and Max and do it that way, but instead I'm using Reaper. It's got some great JS scripts, and you also have the ability to write your own JS script, which is kind of like Max, but not really. But you can still extend the DAW that way. And then a bunch of VSTs. And there'll be some acknowledgments in the description of the video below that I will kind of like call out what VSTs I'm using. There's some great guys that took some of my begging and pleading to create some plugins, and one I'll go into a lot more information as this demo progresses. So the idea behind this is really to base this whole interface around some traditional like improv structures. You kind of like pick a key signature. You've got a few motifs that you're gonna probably play around with, come back to, play off from, and so I've kind of tried to capture all of those things together in one thing that I can control with the drums. And because I have the sticks in my hand, there's not a whole lot of like knob fiddling that you can really do easily. I've tried it. I tried before. I was doing a lot more like knob twiddling and trying to juggle the drumsticks, and it just wasn't working. So I had to give up quite a bit of like the control idea that I had to basically make an interface that was a lot more friendly. So that's kind of where this has ended up so far. And a lot of this was influenced by a TED Talk that I saw Tim Exile give, where he's basically talking about an instrument that anybody could play. This is, I think, takes a little bit more dexterity, maybe, than an instrument that anybody's just going to be able to jump onto. But the idea is that I think we can go a long way in terms of like musical interfaces to make it easier for people to enjoy making music instead of it being quite so painful. One of the plugins that I had a guy build, or convinced a guy to build, is based around coming up with an interface that allows you to play melodic parts without having to have a lot of keys. Another addition to this I want to kind of like add is hopefully sometime soon Pearl is going to be releasing a thing they call the mallet station, which is basically like a MIDI marimba or xylophone that I've been waiting for since I saw it at NAMM, and it's been delayed, so hopefully it's still coming out. But it's amazing because you have all of these surfaces to hit, and so you can do a lot more in a lot less space. So that's going to be a pretty cool addition if it ever comes around. The sound sources are a Nord Rack and a Nord Drum going into an 8-channel line mixer, and just running a couple a dual effects rack unit from Lexicon. Just to kind of give some space. Eventually, the idea is to have all the audio going into the DAW, but until I optimize this, running a bunch of effects is going to increase the latency too much with the MIDI interface, and so that kind of screws things up. So right now, until I get this thing really humming along efficiently, I'm keeping the sound sources and the effects basically out of the box. In terms of the controls, I've got a Behringer foot pedal, obviously the two triggers, kick drum, and then I basically use the left pedal where normally you would have a hi-hat, but I basically use that for my snare. Then here, these 4 pads basically are going into the Nord Drum, Usually have like some kind of like high frequency hi-hat here, and then toms and effects and things here. So now the cool thing about the Nord drum is it will play chromatically. So you can have melodic parts on drums. So it's essentially like another 6-voice synthesizer, monophonic synthesizer, not just a drum source. So I've got some other sounds here. The melodic parts are controlled basically up here. These 4 pads are what I basically call my arpeggio pads. And they're set up to basically go through a sequence every time they're hit. Okay, that one is just running a bass line, so. And so the intervals are stored in the sequencer, but it is basically being transposed by whatever master chord I'm using. And the master chord I trigger with this pad. So every time I hit this, it's cycling through a series of notes, and those notes are triggering basically a chord and a certain key signature with a certain series of chord shapes and progressions that are kind of like programmed in this one pad. I sort of set this in the beginning, like I chose the key signature and some of those kind of things, but in a lot of ways I've kind of developed this so that it's kind of me playing with somebody who's picking chords that sound good without me knowing exactly what they are, and that kind of influences the way I'm able to kind of like improv off it. Theoretically, I'm not that great of a musician. I'm not that great of a musician, so that's why this is more of a demonstration rather than a performance video. But again, so like this arpeggio progression. So the idea is that basically this thing is creating a chord mask of notes that the sequencer that is sort of pre-programmed in here will adhere to. And then I've basically hit these 4 buttons on the octapad to basically choose 4 different motifs. So if I hit this, so you can kind of see that I'm kind of controlling those 2 things at once. And it's all musically kind of tied together because they're basically all being constrained to the chords. The next thing, and again, these are all just basically 4 voices of the Nord rack. So I've got one voice here that's playing an arpeggio. And here I've got the note length set to basically 1 bar, I think. And then I can use MIDI Designer Pro to control a lot of like the parameters. So there I'm going to make the note length a quarter. So now you see it doesn't hold as long. Here I'll make it 2 bars. So that way I can sort of simulate holding down a keyboard key, but by only hitting the drum pads. I'm essentially setting the gate length for how long I want that activity to happen, which is good when you only have 2 arms and 2 legs and you can't really hold one in one place. Although some controllers, like the alternate mode, will allow you to hold notes, but then you can't do anything else with that stick while that note's being held. So the sort of like piece de resistance of this entire thing is based around this pad. This pad is driving a VST that I'm not sure what it's called now because he's changed the name. And I'll have a link again in the description of the video. But essentially it was an idea that I had of that people should be able to play music without having to use so many keys, like physical keys on the keyboard. Because in most cases, once you have a key signature and a scale set, unless you're doing something a little bit more adventurous, you're pretty much going to stay in that key signature. And so you have this keyboard in front of you with a whole bunch of keys that are arranged that you're not going to use a lot of. To me, that doesn't make a lot of sense from an interface standpoint. It makes more sense to have a certain number of keys that allow you to do things musically. And so that kind of babbling doesn't make a lot of sense, probably. So let me just demonstrate what's going on here. So I'm playing a melodic part with these pads. This pad always goes back to home, and in this case like a middle C. This pad will repeat whatever was just played. This pad will move up one note in the scale every time I hit it. And so again, it's just one step in the scale. This pad goes down one step. This pad goes up 2. This goes down 2. This goes up a 5th. This goes down a 5th. This goes up an octave. This goes down an octave. And again, you have a lot more configuration if you have more pads and so forth, or you'd want to have different intervals. That's really easy to set up. But again, this pad plays whatever was just played. So if I go up 1, and let's keep repeating it. Up 1. And repeat it. Down. Down. And then back to home. And then down an octave. And again, that's playing this pad. And now I have got the octapad up here, and depending on which one of these I hit, that controls which voice is being controlled by this pad. When I hit this, it selects this voice for this interface now. And because I've got the note length for that set to 1 bar, every time I hit one of these notes, it's going to sequence through one measure of that note held, which is triggering the arpeggio on the synth. So you can make some pretty cool stuff. The bass and then the snare with that one, so I can kind of get that going. And then again, like if I want to play this sound, now this pad So anyway, that was See, this is like what's cool about this is you could just start playing and just go. I mean, it's awesome. I mean, they talk about like Tim's flow machine. It's like, this is it for me. Because I can just like play the stuff as it comes into my head. And what's cool about, let's go back to those the arpeggio pad. So that's my bass. Is in addition to this arpeggio being constrained by the chord we played, this arpeggio is also transposed by the note I play here. So I'm going to go up an octave, down an octave. So anyway, I could just like do that forever. So in addition to that, it also made sense to have more going on since I only have 2 arms and 2 feet. I thought about the idea of like having like a bite and breath controller, but I don't think that's going to work. It's going to be too much. So instead, what I'm doing is using MIDI delays. In addition to just like audio delay effect, you can use basically delays to make the sound repeat several times. So in this case, I'm going to make it so every time I hit the kick, it doesn't just hit once. So I'm going to choose quarter note repeats, and I want it to repeat 4 times. So now when I hit it, so it's 4 times counting the time that I hit it. So for a kick, I don't really want to do that for the kick. So let's just go back to 1 repeat. But the snare, I want to repeat every dotted eighth 3 times every 3 times that I hit it. So this is like a really complicated example, but if you watch, I'm going to hit the kick once, nothing happens. Hit it again, nothing happens. Hit it again. See those extra hits. So every time I hit it, like the third time, and I can also control the feedback. So basically how much velocity is lost on every repeat. So let's increase the number of repeats to 5 so it's more obvious. Okay, and so here's our hi-hat. So in addition to just repeats, I can basically record. And that's where this really amazing sequencer called Circles comes in. It's basically 8 tracks of MIDI recording that can each be independently quantized and adjusted and set all on the fly. And you can do it without your master clock running, and it'll basically create like a loop based on your input notes. But in this case, I'm using it clocked. So in this case, what I want to do is on my hi-hat, I want to have, let's see, I want 1 beat on every beat. So I'm going to hit record. So now it's playing every beat. I'm going to kind of use that as like a metronome or something. So here I kind of get that complex snare. Going that you typically would be able to play with a snare hand, but if I'm doing something melodic, I can't do ghost notes and stuff with this foot. I'm not that good. I'm sure that like in the proper hands, these tools would be way more powerful with somebody that could actually do some really amazing drumming. And hopefully there will be somebody that comes along and says, you know what, if this idiot could make this work on his own, over a years of work, then maybe somebody with some real talent could take these ideas and do something really, really cool with it that nobody has done before. And maybe they'll hire me as an advisor. That would be kind of cool. So what else? So we got the recording, I kind of already mentioned. And you can record the melodic parts as well. So let's say I want to record that. I'm going to basically, let's record it for 12 beats. So it kind of loops funny. And hit record. And one thing that's one of the things that's interesting about this whole machine is once you start playing with it, especially with like the recording and the delays, it becomes not so much like playing an instrument as like playing with a creature. I mean, it's not to sound too trippy or anything, but it's pretty amazing how when you start kind of getting going on this thing, it starts kind of doing things you're kind of influencing, but you're not totally dictating. And I know that once I kind of get this thing smoother, it's going to be even better, because right now it's still kind of a kludge. Maybe going to live and max or something like that, it's going to make a lot more sense. But anyway. Oh, and I should add these foot pedals. These can control recording as well, and then these control whether or not the note is held. Not held. Held. Basically, these are my modulation wheels. The right one is modulating whatever's being performed here, and the left one is modulating whatever I assign it to at the moment. So let's go back to driving him. turn you off. And I think... Oh, there we go. So that's basically it. Oh, one more thing. So in addition to being able to record the drums, so let's do that again. Add snare in every tune. So I'm still running that delay on my snare. Now what's really cool about this, instead of just like audio looping, is you can change this stuff on the fly. So I want to change that snare rhythm. I'm just going to reduce the number of delays to 3, increase it or decrease it to, let's call it 8s. Actually, let's go 16s. No, 30 seconds. Put that little roll in there. 6 beats. It kind of fades, so get some dynamic to it. A little too much. I'm going to add some hi-hat. And no matter what kind of crap I throw into it, I can now control